thank you. As we turn our hearts and our thoughts to Scripture, will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing unto you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. What a week. The news we've watched on our TV screens and our phones, in our newspapers and everywhere else, perhaps has left us, I don't know what word you might use, a bit numb. It's so unbelievably believable that a woman could be killed as Renee Nicole Good was. And for most of us, it has left us with a heightened sense of shock and anger. As a new term, absolute immunity leaves us searching our memories for any such possibility mentioned in our civics classes, even though we know it's not there. Our hearts are breaking, and we want answers, and we want change, but the change keeps coming in a way that's more like a snowball gaining size and picking up speed in the wrong direction rather than a shift toward process and justice. And then we look beyond our national news and we see things going on in Venezuela and Iran, and our hearts are broken. In our own community, we are well aware that immigrants live in fear. It's part of why our Missions and Social Justice Committee has been doing the tasks that they have to help families afraid to go grocery shopping, or families afraid to walk with their kids to school for fear of their own safety. Even our own citizens who do not fit the majority profile fear that their rights will be denied. Is this what leadership looks like? The ancient nation of Israel, who received the words of Isaiah that we read today, were also feeling overwhelmed and confused. They were a fractured community who had actually been captured by the Babylonians, a longtime enemy. They were barely scratching out a living. Into this setting, Isaiah delivers a vision of a very different kind of leadership. Theologian Stephanie Paulsell begins her commentary on today's passage from Isaiah saying this: in the first of the servant songs that shine out of Isaiah, the first is the one we have as our reading today, the prophet offers a portrait of the kind of leadership we should expect from one called by God: patient, nonviolent, merciful. God's chosen does not execute justice by force. Indeed, this is a portrait of tender care for those who are vulnerable, for ideas still coming into fullness, for small efforts struggling to plant their roots. A bruised reed he will not break, Isaiah says, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. True leadership protects what is weak until it is strong enough to stand, and keeps gentle hands cupped around a weak flame until it can burn on its own. In this way, Isaiah says, the servant will faithfully bring forth justice. She goes on to talk about how unthinkable it is to have someone candidate on a platform that centers caring for the bruised reed and tending to a dimly burning wick. How would that go over? She says that such leadership would be seen as weak and perhaps even self-defeating, not possible. But Isaiah disagrees. Isaiah says that this is a strong model of leadership. It takes patience and consistent work to do the work of justice in order to fan good ideas into flame. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." You know that quote, right? Congresswoman Shontel Brown of Ohio says, like many of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous quotations, these words echo through the ages. They offer hope and give rise to a sense that progress toward freedom, equality, and indeed justice is inevitable. But, she says, the arc of the moral universe is anything but. It does not bend toward justice on its own. No, It only does so because people pull it toward justice. It is an active exercise, not a passive one. This passage in Isaiah is a call to us, those who are called by God in order to make a difference in our world. If we're honest, I think many of us wonder what difference we can possibly make. Do you ever feel that way? In the face of the injustice and inhumanity that we see, how can we make much of a difference? How do we even go about trying to be involved? Where do we find our footing? Those in the work of anti-racism are regularly faced with this question. It has been said that for every year of institutionalized racism, it takes 10 years to unravel it. Think about our national history. So those who work day in and day out in the work of anti-racism know that they will not live to see the conclusion of their work, the work to which they have pledged their lives. This does not, however, mean that their work is not critical or that their work is not necessary or that their work is not worthwhile. No, their work is exactly what is needed to begin untangling the societal webs that support and uphold the racism in our system, some of it blatant and some of it very subtle. The fact that they will not see the conclusion of their work does not mean that their work is not important at all. It is critical. And so is ours. So is ours. There is a quote from author T.S. Eliot in one of his poems in the Four Quartets where he says, "For us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business." The context for his quote is about writing. He is saying that for authors and poets, theirs is to write the words and to craft the poems. What meaning others take for them is not ultimately in their hands or for them to decide. Maybe the same is true for us. Perhaps for us, it is most important that we do the work. It is almost certain that nothing any individual among us does will turn the tide of injustice, but together we can create increased resistance. For us, there is only trying. The rest is not our business. I think it's another way of saying that the call upon us is to remain faithful to the one who calls us and to remain faithful to the work to which we are called, individually and as a community. That call is the bringing of justice, the opening the eyes of the blind, bringing prisoners out of the dungeons. But what do we do? When our leaders aren't protecting the weak flames or the bruised reeds, we have to step in. But it doesn't seem that simple, does it? So how do we do it? You heard Di talk about some of the ways that Southmin has been involved, ways that make a real difference in the lives of families around us. And many of you have participated in some of these ways, either through your giving or through the actual shopping. And I am so grateful that this is a community that makes a difference. It can look like walking through our neighborhoods during school drop-off and pickup to keep kids safe as they come and go from school without their parents who stay at home for fear of being picked up by ICE. It might be working with the schools to provide food for those same families that fear going to the store. I know some of the clergy in our presbytery have participated in protest events coordinated by the organization called Together Lab, and it's not just for clergy people. Together Lab, on their website, talks about how they do sacred organizing. I love that term, sacred organizing. Right? How do we do community organizing as a people of faith and of multiple faiths and multiple denominations? Together Lab does sacred organizing and does so with deep awareness and preparation. They know the risks, they can communicate the risks, and they invite people to join in at their level of risk-taking that they are willing to do. They have trained people to bear witness when immigrants are brought to court. They seek to bear witness and to protest with awareness and acknowledgement of those risks and the cost, encouraging people to weigh that cost and choose their involvement. I want to end by sharing a memory that has been going through my mind over this week. This one was inspired by a passage by a different prophet, the prophet Amos. Amos lived in the 8th century BCE, and in contrast to Isaiah's audience, he lived in a time when the kingdom of Judah was in a time of high prosperity and moral and spiritual decline. He delivered his message of judgment against the elite's social injustice, greed, and neglect of the poor. The verse I've been thinking about this week is perhaps the most well-known verse from the book of Amos, having been famously quoted also by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The verse says, "But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." I had memorized this sometime in college, and as a young adult, I found myself living and working in East Africa. One long weekend, I traveled to Uganda with a group of college students where we camped on the banks of the Blue Nile. Amazing. One morning, after we watched the mist clear that actually hid the Nile from the banks where we were watching, we hitched a ride in a canoe down to a waterfall that was along the side of the Nile. The waterfall was big enough to be exciting, but not so big that it was completely unsafe, let's say. And the waters poured right back into the Nile. The college students I was with joined some of the local kids who were jumping down the waterfall, holding empty jerry cans for flotation. A bit more cautious by nature, I sat on the rocks at the top of the waterfall and watched the kids playing. And this is the verse that came to mind. "But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." Clearly, the image has stuck with me over the years, and this week I've found it rolling around in my head as a prayer, a pleading. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. When can we see even a trickle of that? It's not at all clear to me how we get there, but I'm not at all sure it was clear to the prophet Amos either. And yet it was his call. And he spoke it to the nation of Judah. And I believe the prophets speak to us today just as clearly. That's our cry. That's the kind of leadership we long for, wherever it comes from. Not seeing at the top, it's the kind of leadership that we want to be a part of in whatever role it might be to which we are called. This week, and over the time to come, let's keep looking. Keep looking for the leaders who are doing important work, some here in our neighborhoods, some leading vigils and peaceful protests and efforts to bear witness to hard things in Portland, as Together Lab is doing. Others are finding other ways to quietly work and tend to weak flames and tend to bruised reeds to bring protection and healing and empowerment. Because wherever justice is trickling, we want to be part of turning that trickle into a bigger and bigger, ever-flowing stream.